Hi, everyone, and welcome to Deploy by DigitalOcean. My name is Stephanie Morillo, and today we're going to explore using marketing to increase your visibility, findability, and discoverability online. Marketing is a tool that more and more developers are leveraging to help them meet their professional goals. So whether you're interested in building an online following through blogging or streaming in order to promote your projects, get more consulting clients, or if you want to position yourself for future job opportunities, this talk will help you get started on the path to marketing with purpose. Now, if you're skeptical or weary of marketing, that's okay too. We'll spend some time discussing marketing mistakes that erode trust so you can avoid making these same mistakes in the future. Now, before we get started, here's a little bit about who I am. I'm a product manager, content strategist, and the author of the books The Developer's Guide to Content Creation and The Developer's Guide to Book Publishing. I have extensive experience running corporate tech blogs, editing technical content, including books published by O'Reilly and CRC Press, copywriting for dev shops and agencies, and even managing content strategy for a developer relations team. So I've applied all of the tactics presented in today's talk in my own work or in my capacity as a content strategist working with developers. Developers have strong feelings about marketing. There's no way around it. Marketing is something that devs have always had strong feelings about. I recently asked developers on Twitter to share the first things that came to mind when they heard the word marketing, and these were some of the responses. Used right, marketing is how you communicate with your current or future users, including feedback. Used wrong, it's hacks and tricks to get low-value users and create the illusion of success. First thoughts are clueless and evil, then reluctantly useful, helpful, and necessary. So it's complicated. Without marketing, no one would find my software and therefore no one would run it. It's essential to my success. So why do developers have a strong reaction to marketing? The main reason is because we've all seen examples of bad marketing or questionable marketing practices. As a result, marketing gets a rap for being dishonest, irrelevant, pushy, annoying, and even unethical. Secondly, developers, unlike other consumers, are an extremely savvy and discerning audience. They're sensitive to being sold or lied to about something that doesn't in fact solve their problems. They also know how to search for solutions. They know how to articulate their problems and look for solutions. And they dislike any gimmicks, peddling, sleazy sales tactics, dishonesty, and irrelevant messaging that is used in order to attract their attention. So what are some examples of bad marketing practices? I'm going to outline 5 examples of these practices that you'll likely recognize and want to avoid in your own work. Number 1, bad marketing puts too much emphasis on branding above all else. In his book, The Tiny MBA, Alex Hillman says that people often confuse marketing with branding. So let's break them apart. He defines marketing as a wide range of activities that help people believe you understand them. Branding, on the other hand, is the result of doing that right. And in fact, many people jump straight into branding without actually figuring out what it is that they want to do and how they're going to position themselves in the market. You have to lay some groundwork before you can even think of becoming a brand. So first up, you need to understand what your story and value proposition are if you're promoting yourself. I'm going to talk more about value prop later in the presentation. So if you're marketing a product, project, or service, you need to understand your audience, their pain points, and what alternatives already exist to what you're providing. Then you need to articulate what differentiates you from other people, and that is what your value proposition is. It's the statement that summarizes why someone would want to do business with you. When your marketing consistently reinforces your value proposition, that helps you create a brand. So here's an example from my own life. I've been called the developer content queen or the person to talk to about technical writing because of my value proposition. My value proposition is I help developers become better content creators. Everything that I do, all of the content that I create, all of the content that I share is centered around this value proposition. So this is now my brand because everything I do aligns with that value prop, and the content that I create constantly reinforces this. Next, bad marketing doesn't know its audience. Intuitively, or at least intellectually, we all understand that none of us is for everyone, and this is absolutely true when it comes to marketing. But without properly defining who our audience is, how do you actually know who you're reaching out to? And how do you know that you're actually making the right solution for their problem? For example, how do you feel when you go to a website that's advertising a product or service and you read the copy and you're still confused as to what it is that they are selling and who it's for and what it solves? A symptom of not knowing your audience, for example, is irrelevant messaging. If you don't understand who they are, what their pain points are, what it is that they're looking for, it becomes very difficult for you in turn to align what you are creating to that particular audience. So that's an example, irrelevant messaging. Next, and this is something we can all relate to, bad marketing sells first without establishing trust. So this is a huge reason why developers are weary of marketing, is because of the propensity to sell first. We don't like people who are trying to push things on us, especially if they really haven't taken the time to understand or really listen to what it is that we're asking for. And this is true even if you're not selling a product or a service. You have to establish trust first. And you do that by providing a lot of value up front. When you do marketing really well, you're answering a lot of questions, you're giving a lot of information freely, you're engaging with people, and more importantly, you're listening to them. You really want to sit down, observe, listen, and absorb what it is that they're telling you. What do people want to know? What questions can you answer for them? Good marketing figures this out and delivers value consistently before ever asking for something in return. So in short, give first, ask later. Number 4, bad marketing tries to throw everything on the wall to see what sticks. I'll give you an example in developer relations. It's not unusual to see developer relations teams create profiles across different marketing channels or social media channels. So maybe a particular team is interested in live streaming, so they'll create a Twitch channel. Maybe they're interested in creating funny memes, so they create a TikTok. The problem ends up happening is that a lot of teams start to create profiles in whatever shiny new tool is available without actually understanding why they're doing it in the first place. So who is my audience? Do they really go to these will they really watch these things? Is this something that's actually gonna help solve their problem, or am I actually diluting my message? And more importantly, how do I create content on this channel sustainably? You don't want to have a Twitch profile and a bunch of YouTube profiles and a Twitter profile and profiles on various blogging platforms if you do not have a plan to consistently create and publish and maintain and engage on all of those different platforms. It takes time and effort to build up any channel. So don't rely on any gimmicks to build an audience, especially because someone else is doing it. If you really don't enjoy writing, for example, don't create a newsletter. If you don't enjoy video or podcasting, don't create a podcast or a YouTube channel simply because you see other developers doing it. The best plan is to start creating content in the channels that align with what it is that you enjoy and to spend enough time on those channels to attract your audience. And number 5, bad marketing annoys its audience. Picture this. You do some online shopping, you've checked out a few items, and the next thing you know, you're getting emails once a day, maybe multiple times per day, from a retailer advertising a new sale. Or you sign up for a newsletter in order to get a freebie. They're like, we'll give you a free ebook if you sign up for this newsletter, which is great. You get your freebie, but the next thing you know, you're getting emails every single day, and you're overwhelmed with the amount of content you're getting in exchange for your email address. Or you visit a website to read a blog post, and before you even have the chance to read the title, you get a few pop-ups. 10% off if you sign up for the newsletter, and worse, they make you feel bad if you say no. Bad marketing sacrifices audience goodwill, or worse, the user experience, in the hopes of extracting more from its users. By the way, you can absolutely promote without being spammy, annoying, or obtrusive. So in short, bad marketing does not convincingly answer this fundamental question. Why should anyone care about this? Why should anybody care about what I'm creating? We shouldn't assume that because we've created a product, project, or blog that we think is amazing, that people, our audience, will automatically understand or relate to what it is that we're trying to do. We also can't assume that people will understand our intention, that they'll see it as the solution to their problem if we don't convince them why they should care in the first place. And that is what trips up lots of developers who are interested in applying marketing in their own work. Because we see so many examples of terrible, shady, or irrelevant marketing, one of two things happens. One, we don't do any kind of marketing at all and then wonder why we haven't been able to grow our audience. Or two, which is pretty bad, we actually replicate the bad marketing practices that we dislike so very much. Now, the good news is this. We often associate marketing with sales, for example, because we learn of products and services through marketing, but you don't actually have to sell anything to use marketing effectively. So if you're interested in building up your presence online so that you can attract new job opportunities or speaking engagements, for example, you can still use marketing even though you're not technically selling anything. Over a decade ago, I worked in a firm that provided marketing and communication services to nonprofit organizations. These orgs, they weren't selling products. They used marketing, however, to make the public aware of the services they were providing. And they also used it to generate interest from potential donors. Similarly, you may want to promote a blog post or an open source project. Maybe you've written an ebook that you're giving away for free, or you're running a free conference that you want people to attend. What you do is you go on social media, you'll probably tweet about it, you'll share some links, and you'll spread the word through word of mouth. That's marketing, right? You're using marketing to get the word out there and get people interested enough to read the post, try out your project, or download your free ebook. So here's a definition that I found on Twitter from Lindsay Kopaz. I feel that marketing is widely misunderstood and therefore a lot of really unethical practices stem. My definition of marketing has always been tell folks what you're doing in a way they understand it. That really is the crux of it. You're really just trying to tell people what it is that you're doing in a way that they understand it and in a way that'll get them excited in what you're creating. The best examples of marketing that I see from tech come from developers themselves. These are developers who understand the value of marketing, but more importantly, they're not sacrificing transparency, authenticity in order to do it. They're thoroughly themselves and they're using, they pretty much, okay, so they are thoroughly themselves and they understand who their audience is. And they're not trying to use any kind of gimmicks to get you interested in what they're doing. They use marketing to promote, to inform, to educate, and also to entertain. So there's any number of open source projects, independently run podcasts and screencasts, developer bloggers that many of you already follow who already do marketing really, really well. But it doesn't feel like marketing because it doesn't feel like what we associate with marketing, which is being pushy or conniving or not completely honest. Now, you may actually recognize marketing in terms of other terms that are used, like community outreach, community management, events, blogging, public relations. These are all types of activities that are marketing, but marketing is a catch-all and an umbrella term, and these are activities that roll up into marketing overall. So, for the rest of this talk, you're going to learn step by step how 4 tactics will help you become more discoverable online. I'm going to give you ideas for coming up with your value proposition, what you need to include in your landing page, how to shape up your online profiles, and importantly, how to generate content ideas. Coming up with your value prop. So I talked about value prop earlier, but your value proposition, or value prop for short, is a statement that summarizes why someone should work with you or reach out to you. This statement, what it does is that it helps you articulate the value that you bring to others, what you bring to the table, and it often serves as the foundational basis for your marketing work. So to come up with your value prop, you need to know at least 3 things, which we will cover in detail. Number 1, you need to define your goals. 2, you need to define your audience. And 3, you need to define your culture ad. Your goals. So your goals, rather straightforward. What is it that you're trying to accomplish and why? You can simply take out a piece of paper and start brainstorming this. Write down every possible goal you can think of and mention why it's important to you. So these are some examples of goals that would get a developer interested in wanting to start marketing. I want to get into the habit of writing more. So maybe that's your goal with blogging. I want to switch careers. Maybe you're looking for your first job in development, or maybe you want to switch to a completely different role in tech. I want to find my next job. I want to attract potential clients for my new business. I want more people to use my new tool. I want to speak at more tech conferences. These are all valid goals. There are no wrong or right goals. There are just your goals. So take some time today to sit down and write what it is that is important to you. Next up, your target audience. So after you've identified your goals, you need to identify your target audience. So your target audience is the group of people that you want to reach. A target audience will share similar characteristics. For example, they might have similar interests, similar skills, a similar experience level using a particular tool. Marketers, they tend to rely heavily on research and data, both quantitative and qualitative data, to better understand their audience's pain points, motivations, likes, dislikes, and more. But you don't need to have deep data analysis to better articulate and identify who your audience is, where your niche is. Now, for example, I've said developers a lot during this talk, but in fact, I have a very, very specific group of developers that I am targeting. So one mistake or one common pitfall that a lot of folks tend to go into is that they may use just one label to define their audience, like developers or web developers. It might work in the beginning, but it might be too broad of a term for it to be particularly useful. So for example, let's say you said, I'm creating a podcast for web developers. That's great. Now, assuming that you're talking about all kinds of web developers, regardless of whatever technologies that they use, their programming languages, etc., you might need to be a little bit more specific. So maybe instead of I'm creating a podcast for web developers, what you're actually doing is I'm creating a podcast for web developers who are interested in going on the management track. Or I'm creating a blog for web developers who want to learn more about application security. Maybe you might even say I'm creating a blog for early career React developers. So you see, there's more to it than just the label of the audience themselves. You also want to include things like their goals, maybe their experience level, to make it a little bit more well-defined. So I'll talk about how you can get to that particular level of specificity. I recommend using the following template to start. So number one, the specific group, the label, right? Web developers. Their experience level. So not all web developers are created equal. You have some that are earlier in their journey. You have some that have been doing it for 15 years or so, that are well advanced, that are what we would consider expert level, or even mid-career, mid-level web developers. So you want to include the experience level of your particular audience also to ensure that the content that you're creating really is 100% relevant to that particular audience. Next, you want to talk about what they're interested in. So what are the things that, that early career React developers, what are they interested in? What are the things that are exciting them? What's new in the React space that these folks might want to talk about? Those are the kinds of things that go into interests. Then you want to talk about pain points. What are the things that are frustrating about React for people who are relatively new with the framework? What are the areas that people need a little bit more help or more hand-holding in? And then lastly, what are the goals of folks who are learning React? What is it that they are trying to accomplish? You might identify some patterns or themes and include that here. So I'll give you an example. This is a very extensive and detailed example, and it's the one that I created for this particular talk. So my target audience for this talk they are software developers who are marketing beginners. They're interested in content creation and they know that marketing can help them achieve their goals, but they bristle at marketing tactics that seem too salesy, and they're unclear about what they should be doing to focus on first. They're not clear on what they should be focusing on to start. They want to learn enough about marketing to get started confidently, but they don't necessarily want to become marketing experts. They just want to know enough to get started right away. So you see how software developers, right, which is the label that I use throughout the talk, is actually a lot more specific than that. Not all software developers would be interested in this talk, but these are more or less the kinds of software developers who will be interested in my talk. These are their interests, these are their pain points, and this is their experience level. All right. So if you're not actually sure how clear your audience definition is, and if you're wondering, man, how do I actually go about getting information about their skills, their interests, their experience level, I recommend conducting what is called a sales safari. So sales safari is a tactic that is used in a class called 30 by 500 by Amy Hoy and Alex Hillman. And essentially what it is you're doing some user research. You want to go to the community forums, blogs, and social media platforms where your target audience is. Remember, if you're thinking about web developers, not all web developers go to the same blogs. They're not all active on the same forums or subreddits. So getting a bit specific before you get started will help you identify the areas that you can go to. When you go to these forums and blogs, you're really there to listen to how people describe their interests, their goals, and their pain points in their own words. You want to understand how they describe their needs, how they describe their frustrations, how they describe the things that they're interested in. So write down the words that they use in their own words to describe their problems, needs, and concerns. This is going to help you make sure that your messaging aligns with how your audience actually defines their problems, their needs, and their pain points. So that helps you turn your value proposition into relevant messaging. So when I released the Developer's Guide to Content Creation, I restated who my audience was multiple times throughout the book so that readers could understand that the book was for them. So as a result of doing this, I would get tweets from developers saying, whoa, this book sounds like it was made for me. I am your audience. Why? Because I understood, I listened to how they framed their problems, their needs, what it was that they were interested in when it came to content creation. And I used that very same terminology in the marketing materials that I was creating to promote my book. So this is why defining your audience is important. It's difficult to frame your value proposition and turn it into relevant messaging without it. Finally, you want to know your culture ad. So culture ad is a phrase that was coined by the digital marketer Danielle Leslie. And she argues that culture ad, unlike a culture fit, is different in this way. So we've heard the term culture fit. And a culture fit essentially is asking you, an individual, to fit. It asks whether or not you fit into an existing paradigm or structure, right? Okay, I'm looking to see if this person has the kinds of qualities that will integrate nicely with whatever set culture my team has, for example, versus a culture ad. And a culture ad means, and this is in Danielle Leslie's own words, you add value to every room you walk into. This is what makes you different, right? What makes you different is your culture is your greatest asset. So essentially, you're adding on to an existing culture. You're helping an existing culture evolve by bringing to the table what it is that makes you different and unique. So when you think about your culture ad, think about anything about your background, professional or personal, your interests or your identity or your story that make you unique, that make you different. So my culture ad, for example, is that I am a content strategist that has always worked alongside software developers. I work on an engineering team, but I'm not an engineer. I've always seen myself as a partner to software developers without being a developer myself. And what I bring to the table is that I have extensive experience working with developers. I understand this audience better than other kinds of marketers, right? Like if you're a marketer that's new to the tech space, you might not understand developers very well, but I try to meet developers where they're at. And what I do is I try to help them understand. I try to help bridge the gap between content and marketing and software development in a way that makes it directly applicable to what developers want to accomplish. So that's my culture ad, that I come from outside of the development space, but I see myself as an equal partner in tech to help developers accomplish their goals. So think about it that way. What is it that makes you unique? Like examples of a culture ad will be like this. Maybe readers are going to gravitate toward your content because you draw parallels between programming concepts and real world examples. Maybe that's your culture ad, is that you find a way to rephrase certain difficult concepts into examples that are tangible, that people can more readily understand or relate to. Or maybe readers gravitate to you because of your background. Let's say you are maintaining a tech blog in Turkish, and a lot of Turkish developers are constantly looking for Turkish content on Kubernetes, but there's very little out there except for your blog. And you have made it a point to create Kubernetes content in your native language to help developers who also speak your native language understand these concepts better. So those are examples, some examples of a culture ad. And here's the thing. Everything that you decide you bring to the table is absolutely valid and part of your culture ad. So think about it in broader terms. It's not just necessarily related to identity. There might be things about your life, your background, your story, your professional journey that can be used to help you shape your culture ad. So now that you have these elements, you can start piecing them together to create a value prop statement. So the elements are your goals, your target audience, and your culture ad. And this is the value proposition statement that I came up with and that I have on most of my social media profiles. My value prop is this: I help developers become better content creators. So it's not a slogan, and there are other templates online. By the way, this is not the only way to come up with a value prop, but I like having a value prop that is short and is to the point. And you'll notice that it incorporates my goals, my target audience, my understanding of their goals, and my culture ad. This is what I do for my audience, and this is the value that I can deliver. So when someone visits my blog, they sign up for my newsletter, they follow me on Twitter, they can expect to see content that reinforces this value prop statement. So take some time to reflect on your goals, your audience, and your culture ad, and come up with a few statements that can turn into your value prop. There are a number of templates online, so if you're interested in the sources section, I do link out to a blog post on HubSpot in case you're interested in seeing what other value prop statements look like. All right, so now that you have formulated a value proposition, we need to get the word out. So the first step in this process is optimizing your existing personal site or landing page. So if you have a business or an open source project, it can be your business site or the site where, or your marketing website for your open source project. So even if you choose to host your blog on a community blogging platform, right? So it's not something that you're necessarily hosting. I strongly advocate that you always keep a personal site that you own personally, meaning that is not hosted like on a Medium or any kind of platform like that. You can host your blog there, that's totally fine. But you want to make sure that you have a personal site as well. Essentially, your site is your calling card on the web. So no matter how many online profiles you might have Twitter, you might have GitHub, you might have a Reddit, you might have various online profiles. Your personal site is something that you own, and you should list it wherever it is that you are online. So if someone is ever interested in finding out everything there is to know about you on the web and your value proposition, your personal site should be that jumping off point so that they can learn more about you in other ways. So it's very easy to assume that based on what you blog about or what you tweet about, that people will know what kinds of opportunities you're looking for or what you care about. All these things offer just a glimpse of who you are. So all of your social media profiles are essentially a glimpse of who you are and what you're interested in, but your personal site is the place where you can tie all of those threads together. So your personal site should include a few things. Now it can be a single page site or multiple pages. That's totally up to you. But it should include a short biography, who it is that you are, what your value proposition is, a way for people to get in touch with you. You want a list of links to your active social media profile. So if you are active and you engage with people on places like GitHub, LinkedIn, etc., add those links there so that people know, yes, you can reach out to me in any one of these platforms. And of course, make sure that you link out to your blog. So the reason I mentioned the importance of a personal site is that a personal site actually improves findability and discoverability of new content. If someone, for example, follows you on Twitter and on your links, on your URL, you direct them to your personal landing page, and someone follows you on Dev Community and you also link out to your personal landing page, you're able to serve information on your personal landing page that shows these different audiences, right? The audiences that came through different channels. It helps surface all of the stuff that you're actually working on that will be interesting to these folks. So that's the importance of a personal site. Unlike social media profiles where a new follower is only going to scroll through a few amount of tweets before they decide to follow you or not follow you. So if you're working on conferences, if you're going to be on podcasts, if you are working on multiple projects, it's not easy for someone to just sift through all of your old content through Twitter or through another social media profile to understand what it is that you're working on. So your personal site, again, is the place where you combine all of those threads together and surface the things that are important to you that you want your audience to know about. All right, so your personal website continued. Make sure you have an about page and a contact page. So earlier I described you want to have a short biography that summarizes who you are, where you're working, if you're interested in including information about your current role, where you're currently employed, and of course, your value proposition. In addition to the biography, include a list of all of your active social media profiles. So again, by active, I'm defining as social media profiles that you use, that you engage with people in. Don't include a link to, I don't know, your indie hackers profile there, for example, if you're not really on that platform, if you only visit once every 30 days. Active depends on the person, but if it's a place where you expect to engage with people and engage with content, then make sure you list that there. Next, you want to include a contact page. So the contact page can be a section on your landing page, and this is your contact information. So whether you choose to list an email address or have a contact form, I highly recommend in that contact section writing out what kinds of communications you want to receive. So this is a recommendation that comes from Cal Newport in his book, Deep Work. He calls this method a sender filter, and it forces correspondents to filter themselves before making any contact with you. In other words, if you specify what you will and won't respond to, it helps the sender figure out whether or not their request is something you're interested in before they send the email. So here's an example of one of my favorite contact pages, which I took a lot of inspiration from. So the product designer, Kat Small, has a list of what it is that she's interested in and what she's not interested in. So she's interested in speaking, engagements, interviews, chatting with people, but she's not interested in contract work, and she makes that very clear on her contact page so that she gets more relevant email from individuals. So someone who lands on this page will read it briefly, and they'll determine, okay, this is my request falls under this category, so maybe I should send her an email, or actually my request falls under the what I'm not interested right now category, so I think I'll refrain from sending her that email. So for example, if you're interested in speaking opportunities, you want to podcast, you're interested in one-on-one chats with people, those are the things that you want to specify so that people don't have to guess whether or not this is the kind of request that you will actually respond to. All right. So now we're going to talk about your online profiles. And online profiles, I mean social media profiles and other kinds of profiles like GitHub, even blogs on blogging platforms like Dev Community or Hashnode or Medium if you have those. So optimizing online profiles will help potential followers understand who we are, what's important to us, and what we can do for others. So in this section, we're going to focus on the following elements. Number 1, the social media bio. 2, links. 3, pinned tweets. And 4, GitHub profile readmes. So one of the most underutilized areas of real estate on social media profiles is actually the social media bio. Now, why is that? Well, for one, it's really hard to distill who you are as a person in 140 characters or less. And it's even more difficult to identify what you should include in the first place. And there's no shortage of options. Some developers use their social media bios as a short form resume. Others use it to list or focus on their personal and professional interests. And others are interested in using that real estate to promote some links and their projects and things they're working on. Over time, I've settled on a bio type that works for me. So my social media bio is a combination of short form resume and my value proposition. I list my roles, and I'm not necessarily the roles through my employer, but the things that I'm focusing on right now in my professional career and my value proposition statement. And here's the important thing. I use the same bio on every social media profile I'm active on. And for me, that's Twitter, Dev Community, Indie Hackers, and GitHub. I also use the same avatar, even if my handle is different. Now, why do I do this? Because people don't always follow you through the web. They may only know of you and interact with you on one social media platform. But standardizing my online bio ensures that how I communicate with people and position myself is consistent no matter the platform. So if someone from Indie Hackers ends up finding me on Twitter, they can assume that I will be sharing or speaking on similar content that they knew me on from a different platform, even though the way we engage is very platform specific. So here's some things to remember with your bio. You can be casual and friendly. You don't have to be extremely serious just because you're creating a standardized bio. So when I was thinking about the tone I wanted to use, I wanted people to feel that I was approachable, that I was friendly, that they could easily talk to me. I didn't want anyone to feel intimidated or feel unclear about who I was and what I was interested in. I wanted people to feel like they were welcome to talk to me. Now, humor's great, by the way. I'm a big fan of humor, but use humor with caution in your social media profiles. And there are a few reasons for this. Not all jokes land well with people. Some people may not understand your humor. They may not understand the kind of cutting sarcasm that folks use. And I'm not saying never be funny, but some humor is idiomatic and regional and very culturally specific. So sarcasm and idiomatic phrases should be kept at a minimum in bios if you want your bio to be more readily understood by a wider group of people. Lastly, look at the profiles of people in tech and other industries for ideas. I actually got the idea for my bio after looking at the profiles of small business owners and decided to tweak it for my purposes. There's no right way to write a bio, but it should be something that you like enough to put across all of your social media platforms. Another thing I do on all my social media platforms is I list the same exact URL. In my case, it's stephaniemurillo.co/links. If you have a personal site, a blog, a newsletter, you sell ebooks, and have a bunch of active online profiles, sometimes it's easier to curate and collate all of those links into a list and put that in just one place. Everyone isn't going to click through multiple pages on your website, for example, or they're not going to go through all of your tweets to really see what it is that you're working on and what you're interested in. So make it easier for people to find the things that they may be interested in when they land on your site. I highly recommend this approach for people who work in developer relations and developers who work on multiple projects, for example, because it's much easier to surface relevant content on a single web page than it is to try to resurface old tweets or to try to list multiple links in your bio. If you have a podcast, a screencast, a blog, and a digital store, for instance, create a place where you can share that out and put it across all your social media profiles. If you're in DevRel, in fact, I will say that this link is a must. Developer relations professionals often create content across multiple platforms for other community activities. They participate in many events. They write on their own blog. They write on the company blog, etc. And so having a links page where you centralize all of your DevRel activities allows you to curate an experience for your audience no matter where it is that they found you. And by the way, you don't have to use the links slug. You can create a subdomain or create a custom slug for the platform that you are on. Next, for folks who are on Twitter, utilize the pinned tweets function also as a way of surfacing information that you want people to know about when they click on your profile for the first time. So if you think about a Twitter feed like a Google search, you'll know that with Google, people rarely go beyond the first page of search results. So similarly, people will only scroll through a handful of your tweets. They're not going to see it all. So a pinned tweet in many ways is like the first result in a Google search query. Your pinned tweet serves as your introduction to your audience. This is what they need to know about you, or this is what you want them to know about you when they first land on your profile. So are you working on an ebook? Did you recently launch a blog or a podcast? Do you have a new podcast episode out that you want to promote? Or did you release a new project? These are the kinds of things that make for great pinned tweets. Remember, audiences, people who visit your page for the first time, they will rarely scroll beyond a few tweets. So make your pinned tweet an entry point for prospective followers. Let's say you have more than one thing you want to share. You can make your pinned tweet the start of a thread that goes into more information about who you are and what you offer. So for example, you might say, welcome new followers. My name is Stephanie and I help developers become better content creators. Here's a list of things that I do to help you. And then each subsequent tweet focuses on a specific thing you're working on that shows exactly what you offer. So that's another alternative. Lastly, in addition to the traditional social media bio, GitHub now allows users to create READMEs on their GitHub profiles. So this is another way to augment and highlight things that you want to surface to your audience that were just too much for the smaller bio that you see on the left-hand side. So this is an example of a README profile from the developer Monica Powell. Her README is actually an excellent example. It features a short bio. Hi, I'm Monica with a nice image that kind of summarizes who she is, what she's about, and a list of links of where else you can engage with her online. So take a moment to review what it is that you're interested in putting. So if there are things that traditionally would not fit in a social media profile, like in the social media bio, this is a place that allows you to expand on that. Now, in addition to your profile README, I recommend that you take a look at the pinned repos that you have on your profile. If you'd like to highlight specific repositories better, you can create a pinned repo section on your GitHub profile README where you include a 1-sentence description of each repo as a way of giving new visitors additional context into why those repositories have been pinned and what's interesting about them and what it is that you want people to know. So this gives visitors even more context and it lets them scan your profile even more quickly, right? They have all of the information that they're looking for with enough context to understand what step they want to take next. All right. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to spend time discussing generating content ideas. I get lots of questions from developers about coming up with content ideas and taking the time to write or produce other types of content. So first, what is content? Content is essentially a vehicle for conveying information to others. So in the developer space, content types, so types of content, include blog posts, articles, tutorials, videos, podcasts, and it is actually that, but it's also broader than that. So it's any asset that conveys information. And whether your goal is to inform, educate, or entertain, you convey concepts, informations, and ideas through media. So content does include things like demos, code samples, GIFs, tweets, open source projects, images, infographics, and yes, even memes. Content is one of the most important areas of marketing because this is really the place where you're able to share, learn from, and teach others. And it gives others direct insight into what you're interested in and what you are about. So think of it like this. If your blog or your streaming channel were the first places people visited when they found out about you, what would they learn? What would you want them to know? And how would they describe your value proposition based on your content? Now, you may not have a lot of ideas for content right now, or you may have trouble finding new ideas. If that's the case, I'm going to help you identify 4 sources to tap into to generate content ideas consistently. You ready? Idea source number 1. Write down the list of things you already know very, very well. So this is a list that's kind of a brain dump of everything and anything you're confident about related to the kind of information or topics that you're interested in surfacing to your audience. So these are the things that people will likely ask you about. What do people come to you for, right? Look in your drafts folder or surface any old lists that you've created with possible ideas and add them here. So here's an example. Let's say you're a UX designer and you're coming up with a list of topics that you know really well. These might be some of the topics on that list. You might say, I know a lot about design systems, so that's an idea. User research, really good at that. Accessibility. UX tools like Figma, I can write an entire tutorial on how to use Figma, as well as usability studies. These are the kinds of things, again, that you feel very confident that you know about, that you can write a blog post or create a video around. Idea source number 2. Write down a list of existing content you've already created elsewhere. So for example, if you still have your notes and slides from old conference talks or meetups, screencasts you created, podcasts, open source projects, you're gonna mine everything you already have for inspiration and consider repurposing them into new types of content. So you might want to turn your old conference notes into a blog post. You might want to write show notes for all of your future podcast episodes. If you created a library, for example, you might want to write a blog post about the design decisions you made or the process of creating it. If you recorded a podcast episode, you want to extract some sound bites and turn that into a blog post promoting that episode. So chances are there are things you have done or things you've already created that you can use as the basis for fresh content. Number 3, idea source number 3, you want to write about things that other people need. So you remember when I talked about the sales safari early in the presentation? To find what other people need, you need to do research. First, you can ask people what they want to know about a particular topic. On social media, for example, you can just ask, hey folks, what do you want to know more about serverless? What are some questions about serverless that you have? And see what questions people respond with and use those as the basis for blog posts. I've done this before. I will ask developers, hey, what questions about content do you have? And folks will respond with some questions or things they're confused about, and I'll turn that into content for future blog posts. Second, you can go to community forums and observe conversations people are having. So here you'll want to identify what they're having trouble with to see if you find some common themes or patterns. And you always want to take time to observe and listen to conversations. You don't necessarily always have to do the talking. It's really important to take a step back and do the listening. So here's an example of why this kind of research is important. When I was working on the Bundler team a few years ago, we realized that we had no official documentation to troubleshoot a common problem that people were experiencing. So the only place people could talk about it and that they were able to find information about it was in a Stack Overflow thread. So we ended up writing an article to address the issue at length, and the article ended up ranking really high in search. And what this means is that the article was relevant to people and people were able to find it when they searched for the problem, right? So we basically did a search on our own to see what information existed already. We realized that there wasn't information here, but there was a gap, something we needed to address. So we created the content to address that gap. And finally, we come to idea source number 4. Write down a list of things you want to learn. Early in my tech career, when I was learning how to code, my mentor suggested that I start blogging to document the things I was learning. So each entry that I wrote focused on a concept that we went through, and I explained what the concept was, and I did that in my own words. This helped me crystallize my understanding of what it was I was learning and allowed me to process it better. So if there's something you've been meaning to learn, write about it. And write about the areas that are confusing or frustrating, and write about any workarounds you find if you hit a roadblock. So to recap, there are 4 sources you can pull from to generate new content. These are things you want to know, things you already have, things others want to know, and things you want to learn. Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with 3 content production tips. Number 1, make the time to write or create content by working in time boxes. Find and schedule 3 to 4 time boxes during your week, 15 to 30 minutes each, and block it off on your calendar. This is going to be your scheduled writing time. And in addition to writing, other activities you can and should use this time for are research, outlining, and of course, refining and editing after you've created your draft or your video. This will help you establish a routine, and over time, you can adjust the schedule as needed. But you can start with as little as 15 minutes a day, 15 minutes 3 to 4 times a week, and go up to 30 minutes. And you set a timer for yourself so that when you hit the end of that 30 minutes, you put everything away and you move on to other things. 2, if you're writing a technical article like a tutorial, have a friend or a peer review your post before you publish it. This is certainly critical for folks who are writing documentation, since clear, concise, and accurate documentation is crucial for users who are learning to work with a particular software. Ask your technical reviewers to follow the instructions in your article and point out areas that can be improved. Think about it like a code review, but for words. A technical review can help you polish your article before you hit publish. And 3rd, check your article for typos and grammatical issues before you publish. If you're using software like Google Docs or Microsoft Word, you can use the native spell check and grammar check functions that come with those programs, or you can run your text through apps like Hemingway app and Grammarly. This will help you point out any problems with your text and allow you to make changes from within the apps. Checking for typos is really important because having a lot of typos affects the quality of your article. It also affects the readability. You want people to be able to comprehend what it is that you are sharing. You want them to be able to comprehend and to process the information that you're sharing. So when you have too many errors in a blog post, they tend to be distracting, and sometimes they can actually create roadblocks for users. So think about it as a quality check before you hit publish. So that's it for my presentation today on marketing for software developers. If you are interested in receiving more content tips, these are the places you can find me online, stephaniemurillo.co/links. There you will find links to my content blog, my newsletter, which is called the Developer Content Digest, links to my ebooks, and links to one-on-one coaching sessions. And I am very, very active on Twitter at Radio Murillo, so I encourage you to follow me there. Lastly, here is a list of sources that I used to create this talk. And with that, thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of the conference.